Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, I'd just like to share with you that I have narrated a story over on my brother's channel, Forgotten Lives. It would mean a lot if you guys would go and check it out after this video. It's a really good story. I'll leave this link at the end and in the description. Thanks. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This was in 1976. I was laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. I lived alone. In the dark, I saw a young girl walk into the bedroom, walk over to me, and close her hands around my wrist. I freaked. She vanished. On another night, I tried falling asleep. I saw a woman walk into the bedroom along the foot of my bed, and I thought she was gone. I went to roll over, and my moving elbow bumped into someone in bed with me. You know the feeling of a body in bed? As soon as I realized that, and had that shot of fear, the person vanished, and I was able to finish rolling over. Nobody in the way any longer. I finished my lease with the living room light on all night, to shine into the bedroom. Then I moved across town. In my new apartment, I'd sleep on the living room sofa on weekends, and slept facing the back of the sofa, with my back to the open room. In the middle of the night, sleeping soundly, my eyes popped open in the darkness, and I was completely awake, and with a notion to look over my shoulder. So I did, and saw some figure in the dark standing next to me, a bit hunched over as if on its hands and knees, and watching me sleep. This person had no feet. Half of him faded out below the knees. I swept my arm outwards to touch whoever this was, but the person mildly stepped back out of reach of my sweep. Still lying on the sofa, I reached a bit further, but the person stepped back once again. Getting annoyed, I jumped off the sofa and chased the person across the living room saying, "I've got you now," and I swept my arm through it. It faded out. It was actually a very cool visual effect, my arm passing through as it faded out. Still annoyed, I turned on the lamp, checked my watch, and it was exactly 3 a.m. at this moment. I turned off the lamp and went to sleep again on the sofa. The next morning when I thought about it, that's when I got really scared. There are two stories that I have that both give me shivers, both of which came from my grandma's house. I went to my grandma's place to help her move after the loss of my grandfather. Things were a little emotional. Either way, there was one night where I woke up with a pain in my chest. I woke up and waited for it to go away. It took about 30 minutes, but it did. Then I realized I really had to take a piss. Really bad. I went and took my piss with no problem. Here's where the scary part hits. My grandma has a long-ass hallway. Like, if I had to guess, I would probably say it was about 40 to 50 yards of hallway. It always just made me feel uneasy. Well, this time when I walked down it, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, and I felt as if I were being watched. I turned the light on and it made me feel a little bit more at ease. I walked out to the bathroom, and after taking literally the biggest, most relieving piss of my life, I walked back to the end of the hallway. I turned the light back off, and at the other end of the hallway I saw a dark figure just standing there. It felt like it was just staring at me. I turned the light back on, and there was nothing there. I turned it back off, and there it was again. I peeped a little, and I slept in my car for the rest of the night. This second time was more recent. We didn't immediately sell the house after my grandma moved. We remodeled it to make it more modern. So I went by to check on the stuff and ended up staying the night. I went to go to sleep and did all the normal stuff. Turned the lights off, closed the door, and started to hear tapping coming from the corner of the room. I turned the light back on, and the tapping stopped. I repeated this process for 20 minutes, until I just got over it and ignored the tapping. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway and the sound of something dragging along the ground. About 5 minutes later, I started hearing drums. I noped out of there and boarded the Nope train to the Nopathorn and haven't gone back since. I want to say we sold that house recently. I tried talking to my grandma about the stuff, but there was an experience she had forever and a half ago that changed her outlook on the supernatural, and now she just leaves it alone. She literally turns ghost white whenever we talk about it. My grandma and grandpa spent some of their spare time hunting lost treasures. One that they were working on was located in a place called the Black Hills, or Mountains. This place was out near Winslow, Arizona. The treasure was a large amount of gold taken by Spanish conquistadors. As the story goes, these conquistadors all wound up dying in the hills and mountains. These mountains also were considered sacred by the local Native American tribe. Anyway, my grandparents managed to pinpoint the exact location of where this loot was, and they set out with a pair of friends to check it out. They couldn't get to where they needed to go, so they decided they would simply mark the trail and come back another day. That night at around 1 or 2 in the morning, my grandmother woke up for no explained reason. She said she felt uneasy and woke up. She then explained that in the doorway there was an apparition of a Spaniard in conquistador armor staring at her. She then said that he said in Spanish something along the lines of, if she were to return to the mountains, she would die and her family would be cursed. What made this even more interesting is her friend had the exact same experience on the exact same night around the same time. They were able to pretty much match their stories to a T without any prior conversation on the issue. Plus, on top of that, my grandfather worked for the railroad, and the reason they couldn't go any further into the mountains was because my grandfather and his friend needed to get to work to haul freight that night, and was in a different state by the time this happened to her. The thing is, he also had the exact same thing happen to him as well. After that night, they simply didn't talk about the supernatural that much. This story is from years ago, and I couldn't bring myself to ask my grandma about it again. The look on her face is haunting. My cousin had a child about 8 years ago. My great-grandmother, a very beloved woman, all-around great person, my grandma Shaver, passed away while his wife was pregnant, and only about 2 weeks before she was due. This was a big deal for a few reasons. My cousin would have been the first of his generation on my mother's side of the family to have a child. Therefore, it would have been Grandma Shaver's first great-great-grandchild. 5 generations alive at the same time. It would have been pretty cool. But she passed away from a stroke, and it was very tragic. Fast forward a couple of years, my cousin and his wife are showing their daughter some family pictures. She's approximately 3 to 4 years old at the time, asking her, "Who's this?" and seeing if she remembers the names of aunts, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas. They sort of skip over a picture of Grandma Shaver, and she puts her hand on it and goes, "That's Grandma Shaver." My cousin said he was a bit uncomfortable, but asked, "Do you remember hearing us talk about her?" And according to him, his daughter looked him right in the eyes and said, "No, but she visits me and talks to me all the time. He said he didn't sleep right for a few weeks. Good thing we're all sure if she is a ghost, she's probably the most kind and gentle ghost there is. Still creeped me out. As a kid, I used to have awful nightmares every night, as well as the occasional night terrors. It had actually gotten so bad that I never slept for more than 4 hours a night. I think it was thanks to a mixture of the sleep deprivation and general paranoia that I began seeing things out of the corner of my eye. And usually there'd be nothing there when I'd do a double take. Once though, while I was walking through a hallway in my house one night, I turned, and there was actually something there. It was tall and looked like a smoky, wispy silhouette, except for the yellow eyes, which looked very solid and bright in the low light. I've never felt the same level of dread as I did in that moment. I used to be religious, and I didn't know until years later, but my church had actually told my father that something with yellow eyes was tormenting me. It made my skin crawl when he told me, because I never actually told him about it. At some point it stopped, and I grew up and mostly forgot about it. A few months ago, I took my preteen sister to see a midnight showing of a horror film, and afterwards, we began talking about our weird and creepy experiences, and tried to rationally explain them. Mostly everything had some sort of logical cause, until she told me that when she was younger, she used to see shadow people out of the corner of her eyes. I laughed and told her it was funny, because I had seen some too. It stopped being funny when she told me about how she was watching TV in our house during broad daylight, while she had stayed home, sick from school. She was home alone when she heard something down in the hallway. She turned and saw a wispy, tall silhouette with shining yellow eyes. I had a rough time sleeping that night. The first time I saw this person was in Caracas, Venezuela, when I was 6 years old. Her name was Lenore. She was a very old woman, invisible to others, who lives in my grandmother's house. She walks fast. At first I only saw her through the doors, like a quick shadow running in front of me. Then one day, she stopped in the middle of the door. It was the first time I saw her face. I think it was almost every week. When I was a teenager, I even started talking to her. As a child, I came to tell my parents about the strange shadows, but they just said it was my imagination. I know it was very real. I have seen and spoken with Lenore many times. The last time I saw her was on my 18th birthday. Today, many years later, I get anxious and confused. I received an email from a website unknown to me. A cousin started a family tree with photos and everything. I'm shocked I saw Lenore. She was my grandmother's aunt. How is that possible? Does anyone else have any experiences like this similar? When I was a younger kid, I had a really hard time getting to sleep, and I normally got to bed really late at night. My mum has always been that way too, so my mum mentioned that she heard something at night, and she wanted me to stay up a little longer to hear it. I did. It was summer anyway. Fast forward to the night. It's about 1 a.m. My mum said it usually happens during her nighttime routine, so she told me to sit in the living room and listen while she went to brush her teeth. That's when I heard it. There were footsteps upstairs. You could hear the footsteps start at the window in my parents' room, then walk away towards the other bedroom, my baby sister's. It sounded muffled, until the footsteps arrived to the landing of the stairs. Then it got louder, because the landing was hardwood floor. After a few steps, you then heard the footsteps on the carpet again, when they arrived at my sister's room. By this time, they didn't go all the way to the window. They went to my sister's crib and paused for a moment before continuing back to the window in my parents' room. I listened to this for about 5 to 10 minutes, with the footsteps taking about a minute to go to the window, to the crib and back. My mum then came out of the bathroom and said, "I told you I heard something." Well, we then opened the door and it stopped completely for the night. The next night I do the same thing and heard it again. So I open up the doors and send our dogs up, who get to the top of the stairs and immediately turn around and bolt down. My stepdad was there that night, and quickly ran upstairs after the dogs came down and looked everywhere. There was not a single place he didn't look. There was nothing to be found, and the windows were not locked. Couldn't explain it for years, and the neighbors that moved in after us apparently heard the same footsteps. This story happened to my dad. Now, my dad has never been one to make up stories, and he can't even share this story without getting goosebumps. It happened about 6 months ago, when my parents were on vacation at a friend's beach house. Our friends always told us about the place next door, and that it had 5 new owners over the past 3 years. The guy who last lived there actually committed suicide about 3 weeks before this, but we don't know why. My parents just arrived for the night. Everything is fine all day until they're getting ready for bed. My dad starts to smell gas. Turns out the pilot light went out, so he goes outside to turn the gas off. While he's outside, he started to get chills, and the entire time outside he felt nervous. Once he found the shutoff, he hears someone say, "What are you doing?" The voice was so real and pronounced that he actually responded with, "Shutting off the gas." He then realized what he just did and froze. Looking around, he saw no one. He thought it was my mother at first, but after freaking out and running inside, she was in the bathroom brushing her teeth. My dad couldn't sleep that night at all, and they ended up driving home at 3 a.m. They told our friends, the house owners, and they looked mortified. They told us the guy who committed suicide not too long ago did it by gassing himself in the house. My dad can't tell this story without getting goosebumps. I don't think I've ever seen my dad legitimately scared in his entire life. He gets fear in his eyes when he told me for the first time, and that's something that he can't fake. I was living with my best friend, and I will call her Amanda. We lived together in an apartment. Amanda and I would work different times of the day. I worked mornings, and she worked nights. So I would be by myself at night. I would hear different noises around the apartment, but I thought nothing of it. But there is one room in general that stands out. That's Amanda's room. She has this closet that I would hear noises in, but I would not dare to go in there. But then one night, I was cleaning before bed when I heard the closet door crack open, and I almost shat my pants. When I saw an outline of a person, I booked it out the door, and I'm a grown man that's not scared, but that really did scare me. I messaged Amanda telling her everything, and she said she saw outlines of people in her room and thought it was just her imagining things. I looked to see what time it was. It was 3 a.m, and she said she'd be home any minute. Then I saw Amanda's car pulling up. She ran up to me and asked if I was okay. I told her no, that I was scared, and she let out a scream I will never forget when she saw a group of transparent people looking at us through a window. We drove so fast out of there, I couldn't even remember where we were. The next morning, we packed up all our stuff and left. Now, me and Amanda had got married and had one son, and we had never experienced anything like that ever again. Has anything like this ever happened to any of you guys? I was about 12 years old and staying at my grandparents' house after my aunt's wedding. The house itself wasn't very big and was the same house that my mother and her sisters/brothers lived in growing up. After the wedding reception was over, my mum wanted to take me back to my grandparents for the night, so all of the adults could go out and get a couple of more drinks. When we arrived at the house, my mother and I both could very faintly hear a baby crying, with a woman trying to comfort the baby. Now, the house isn't very big, so you can hear pretty much any noise in any point of the house. Our initial thoughts were that someone forgot to turn off the TVs in the house, so we both walked around the house trying to find the next TV that was left on. To our surprise, not a single TV or radio was left on, but the volume of the woman and baby remained constant. It didn't matter which room we were in. If we were in the basement or the landing, the volume of the lady and the baby was always constant. This, of course, scared the shit out of me, as I never believed in ghosts before this happened, but there was no explanation for it. Now, my mother was a little freaked out as well, but she had a bar to get to. She then just told me that it was nothing, and got in the car and left me alone in the ghost house. I immediately turned the TV on with the volume set to high as possible, without busting my eardrums. I was exhausted, but drank pop to not let myself fall asleep and give this thing an opportunity to attack me. My parents showed up a couple of hours later to a kid wired on sugar just staring at the TV screen. I later told my aunt who grew up in that house this story, and she was ecstatic. She had always claimed that she heard a woman and a baby in that house growing up, but no one believed her. Ever since that day, I believe that something like ghosts exist in some degree. It doesn't matter how much evidence or data that people show me claiming that they don't. I know what I heard, and it gives me chills just thinking about it. At least mine was pretty nice, and didn't break glass or stuff like that. I used to work as a nanny, and was working with my last family before I took off, as I worked right up until I had my son. Their house was in a subdivision that had been built up in a field, and from the very beginning, I heard strange things. It was a 2-story home, and when the kids and I were downstairs, we would hear footsteps from the upstairs floor. They sounded like running, light and quickly paced. Now, the family owned a largish dog with an incredibly fat cat as well, so I always chalked it up to them being responsible. One day, though, I heard the steps when the pets were both in the living room. The younger boy of 2 was upstairs napping, and the steps were running from his room to his parents' room, where he was supposedly asleep. I walked up quietly to check up on him, expecting to have to lay him back down, and instead saw a small blonde boy in just a diaper. These kids were Mexican. He looked at me, ran and giggled, and ran into the second bedroom closet. It was winter, cold, and he was mostly naked, so I ran in after him to figure out what was happening. He wasn't there. From then, I saw him probably 5 more times in the time I worked there. I heard the running every day multiple times, and the kids talked to and spoke about him often. Another time, the 2 were playing in his bedroom, while I did some preschool reading with his sister. He ran screaming back to me, which was incredibly rare, as he was the most chilled out child in the world. He literally screamed himself hoarse before I could calm him down, and when he finally did, he was crying about the bald man. I told him to describe him, and he couldn't, so he drew me a picture. It was a tall, black shape that went to the ceiling, standing in the corner of his room, on his bed. When I checked, there was nothing there, but of course it wasn't the last time the bald man was involved. The parents I worked for had trouble getting the second child to sleep in his room after that, so his room was generally empty until they moved a few months later. Twice when I was there for early mornings, there was a very distinct black shape standing in his bedroom. It was pressed against the glass and had one hand raised. When I was around 3 to 5 years old, our electricity went out and my family stayed at a friend's house. My brother and sister would play with the kids, but I didn't. I would play with a girl in a butterfly garden, but when I tried to show my mum, her mum said, "Sweetie, no one is there." I shrugged it off, thinking she was just playing since I was young. When I was playing with the girl, I would talk to a man in all black, and would always call him the man in black. I feared him, but liked talking to him. The thing is, the only thing I could truly remember about both of them was they both died by drowning in a lake that was nearby. Me and a friend of mine were in my living room trying to sleep. She fell asleep at 1 a.m., and I stayed awake. A DVD player suddenly turned on by itself, so I sat up, turned my head around and saw a white glowing figure, a small face covered in a cape. It looked about 20 centimeters tall. I never felt afraid or intimidated. I bent over to get a closer look of the figure, and after about 20 seconds it faded away. That's when I started to feel scared. I turned the DVD player off and went to sleep. I know this wasn't a dream since my brother slept on a separate mattress, a few meters away from me and my friend. But he mentioned that he had seen me sitting up and bending over, staring at the bureau in the hallway. My auntie lives with her employer. She used to babysit the employer's kids, which are now fully grown adults. That's why she lets her live with her. My auntie's been working for her since 1994. One of the doors on the left of the house leads to the bathroom, and the other door leads to the living room. The house has about 3 living rooms. The door is very old and big, and has a lock, but I didn't lock it obviously, because I didn't need to. I started hearing someone trying to open the door. My auntie is a tomboy, so then I went under the bed to surprise my auntie. But when I looked up, I saw a woman with long black hair and a white dress. Her hair was covering her face, but I could see that her skin was as white as sunscreen. She stayed standing there for a minute and then left. I was more surprised than scared, but now I would have crapped my pants. Has this happened to anyone else? I found out my uncle was in the hospital because of his heart problems, and they had caught up to him. So my family and I called the hospital, and we spoke to him. He always could make any situation bright. He had the best sense of humor. He was always making jokes, and I was trying to laugh and not cry, and trying to spot words out through the tears. We had to hang up before I could say bye or I love you or anything. And the next day, we got a call saying how he died, and that he wanted us to know first. The next morning I woke up. My eyes flew open, and I don't know why, but I saw an orb banging on the walls of the house. I had a feeling that it was him, so I asked, "Are you my Uncle Dennis?" It responds with floating over the picture I have of him on my wall. Then I hear a whisper in my ear, because it wanted to. It has his rights. That was the ending to our favorite joke that could make me smile at any time. It's not so much creepy, but it felt good that he was okay. I miss you, Dennis. I worked in an old Civil War fort turned tourist attraction. I was working there during the Halloween festival as an unpaid volunteer character to scare people. I was a pirate. Anyway, this was pretty far up north, so October was cold as hell, and they had these big drink dispensers of hot chocolate for us all. Ours ran out, so I volunteered to go find our boss and get a refill. I ventured off into the dark parts of the fort that were closed off to visitors for the evening to find the supervisor. It was dark as hell, with only the light coming in through the old arrow/gun slits on the walls, and started to make my way down what is called Two-Step Alley. This is a very long hallway, named for the fact that every 15 to 20 feet, there are two small steps up, as it was built on a slight slope. This hallway is at least 100 feet in length, if not more. There are two entries, one at either end, and there are no alcoves, no doorways, no windows large enough to crawl through. It's just a single straight shot. So I get all the way to the end of this hall, and around the corner is a man dressed in a fantastic Civil War/soldier's uniform. I mean, it was amazing. I remember being really impressed by it, and giving the guy a nod as I went past him, and him looking at me right as I looked at him. I turned the corner, then paused and thought, oh hey, maybe that guy knows where the boss is. So I turned around and peeked back, just to say, hey, do you know? But he was gone. Just gone. The hallway was way too long for him to have made it to the other end without sprinting. And I would have heard that, because this place is echoey as hell. I found out later that apparently, while the fort never saw battle, it did have run-ins with winter deaths, as well as the nasty flu outbreak, and issues with diphtheria. It's not something I tell people on a daily basis, but when I was little, I woke up to a banging on the window. At first I figured it was just the wind and tried to shrug it off and go back to sleep. But I kept hearing footsteps in my room. My room had a large enough area for you to walk in circles in front of the bed. You know, the kind of noises that are just supposed to be the house settling? It sounded like someone was circling my room. I used to sleep with the radio on, and at this very moment it was playing a very depressing song that I can't remember the name of, but if I hear it on the radio I still get the creeps. So that really started scaring me. The room also felt as it were getting colder. At this point I was really scared, and I decided to make a run for it to my parents' room down the hall. As I passed through the area where the footsteps were, I got so incredibly cold that I could see my breath, and froze for a second only to hear the words, I'm lost. I bolted to my parents' room, and hid under their bed, and cried myself to sleep. I was about 5 or 6. We were living in a rented house that seemed normal enough, but strange things started to happen shortly after we moved in. My older brother liked doing these huge 500-piece puzzles, and he would put them together on the floor of our bedroom, and they started getting messed up during the night. Everyone naturally assumed it was me, but it wasn't. Not long after that began, I started to have really bad nightmares about a woman in her early 20s. She was wearing a white cotton nightgown with violet flowers on it. She had long, wavy, tangled black hair, and was swaying from the ceiling light and she would always stare at me with a look of pure hatred. It got so bad that my parents took me to a therapist who said that I was having night terrors. About a month after the night terrors started, we moved to another house suddenly. My parents claimed it was because they found a house closer to my dad's work, and just like that, the night terrors stopped and my brother's puzzles were being left intact. It wasn't until 15 years later, visiting the family, that I found out the truth. My mother was talking to one of our neighbors about my night terrors, and she said that another family with a little girl rented the place a few years before us, and she had the exact same nightmares, right down to the nightgown with the pretty purple flowers. The neighbor also mentioned that no one seemed to stay in that house for more than a year. My mother thought it was way too much of a coincidence, so she started asking around and found out from an older couple in the neighborhood that a young woman had killed herself in the house in the early 60s, as my experience took place in the mid-80s. My mother went to the library and looked through the microfiche and found the news articles. It turns out that the girl in her early 20s had mental health issues and was being cared for by her parents, who had gone into her room in the middle of the night and saw that she had hung herself by the ceiling light. I never got to see the picture they had of the girl in the paper, but my mum said she had long wavy black hair. I'll never forget her eyes burning through me and her face distorted in silent rage. In my culture, if someone dies in a violent way, we should burn their clothes immediately. My uncle, who was a degenerate loser and predator, died in a fitting fashion. He was dragged by a car and thrown into a ditch. The coroner's office released his clothes that he was wearing at the time of death. My uncle warned his sister, my mother, and his wife not to look at them, but they got curious and wanted to see. I followed them down the stairs, and they made me stay outside the room while they were snooping. While we were down there, we heard a smash upstairs, and we ran upstairs to see a bunch of glasses that were shattered and no one in the house. My aunt and mother were spooked, but didn't think much of it. This house was in the middle of nowhere, and it was the middle of winter. Our wakes are 24 hours long, and someone must always be with the body. A family friend was leaving the wake and drove by the accident scene. She says that what she saw was my dead uncle, and he smiled at her in a very unsettling way. We woke up next morning, the last day of the wake, and a day before the funeral. My uncle was rattled. I heard him tell my mother and aunt that he heard the crunching of boots on snow. It was 4 a.m. He went outside with the shotgun and no one was there. My aunt and mother came clean about what they'd done. My uncle said he warned them. They started a fire and disposed of the bloody clothes. He was buried the next day, and no one bothered them again. My dad and auntie have told me this one on separate events, and both accounts were the same. When my dad was about 16 in the late 70s, he and my auntie were waiting in my grandparents' waiting room at the front of the house, just outside my grandparents' bedroom, where my great-grandfather lay dying. The room had 3 exits, one that leads to my grandparents' bedroom, one that leads to the rest of the house, and the door that leads to the front garden, and there was no breeze at all, especially from anywhere in the house. My aunt felt cold, so she got up to close and lock the previously ajar wooden door, and sat down. About 3 minutes later, my grandmother lets out a wail as my great-grandfather died. And, at that exact moment, both my aunt and father testify. The sturdy wooden door flew open and slammed shut, as if someone had stormed out the house angrily. It couldn't have been the wind, as the way the door opened and closed was exactly how an enraged person would slam the door. I've asked them both separately, and they both gave me the exact same details. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbor's kid. His name was Alex. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had up in the corner of my room, facing the window. He would play for hours, staying preoccupied, while my brother and I would play video games in the next room. So one night, when I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting, my brother came to me and said, "Alex is under your bed shaking." I asked, "What's wrong with him?" My brother told me to follow him into the room and try to talk to him to get him out from under the bed. I go inside to find that he is on the verge of tears and was trembling profusely under my bed. "Hey Alex, what's wrong? Why are you under there?" "Him," while looking at the sliding closet. As I walked towards the bed in order to help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now, my parents went out to dinner with his, and he explained the whole story in detail to both his parents and mine. It sent a shiver down my spine. Here's what happened. My mum told me that Alex was playing with my Legos and heard a slight murmur from my closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of, "Come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed the closet had a slight opening, with light peering in from my lamp. He stared at the crack and he saw an eyelid open. He told us that there was a man in the closet. Alex then hid under my bed after he gave out a slight yelp. The family rushed back into my house and to my brother's room. In horror, we find my closet door rocked open and a few things missing. My window had been left previously open when it was previously closed. A few things knocked over which had not been touched previously. We still don't know what force we're reckoning with after that evening. Thank God, nothing more severe happened. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's scary stories. I love a good ghost story. I'm not sure if one or two of them were repeats or not. I read so many stories, and sometimes many are similar that I'm unsure if I've read them before or not. So yeah, if I have, I apologize, but if not, that's still 18-19 new stories for most of you. Anyway, if you like the video, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. It always helps me out a bunch and goes a really long way. If there's a story you would like to share, send it to my Reddit or my email, info in description. And like I said at the start, I narrated a story over on my brother's channel. He's just recovering from some mouth surgery and his narrations aren't going to be up to scratch because of mouth surgery. So I helped him out, and it would mean a lot if you would check it out. And I mean, I narrated it, so that's more reason to check it out if you like hearing my voice. It is actually a really good story. So like I said, link in the description and on screen now. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, click that link, and I'll see you in the next one.